everybody, it's George here from NVISION, and we have a very special guest here today, and Mr. Andrew MacLean from SparkEngine. Andrew and I connected online, and he had reached out for a chit chat about SparkEngine, and really caught my curiosity. And what I really liked about Andrew is when I went to his LinkedIn profile, which I recommend you all do, and connect with a smart guy like him, is he's always open to meeting new people. That was written in his bio. So I'm like, I want to talk more to this guy. So thanks for showing up. I appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you, George. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this conversation. Obviously, the world of AI is kind of like a hurricane right now. It's coming at us fast and furious, a lot of things going on. And, I've been a big proponent of it for the last few years, but I would say in the last 6 months or so, I've really seen an incredible acceleration and an adoption of it. So before we get into all of that, please introduce yourself. Tell us what you do at SparkEngine and fill the audience in on the wonderful things that you're trying to achieve with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am co-founder and CEO of SparkEngine. My career's been in marketing and operations primarily. I ran a marketing agency for a number of years, jumped around on a bunch of different projects, but the startup world has always had my heart. AI has been the last 2 to 3 years of my life, honestly, probably right around the time where it came on your radar. I think ChatGPT, blew everyone's minds, even though it was very, very rudimentary at the start.
Yep.
And been on a couple projects, but for the last year or so, I've been with SparkEngine, a small team. We really just love building things with AI, and it's my life. Keeping up with it is what I do.
And I'm sure there's a lot of challenges in keeping up with it because it is moving fast and furious, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So we're going to get into that. And, I also know you're a black belt in Taekwondo, so you've got some serious discipline. So you're really following this path and this pursuit of a world that's so vast and so challenging and so interesting. So when you were in the marketing space, obviously having that background helps contextualize for us anyways, like you're here at a marketing agency. What are you seeing that's actually working in the world of AI for not only agencies, but in general? What are people using AI for as you're seeing it from your perspective?
Sure. I think the lowest hanging fruit for AI has been the sales and marketing side of running a business. For a couple reasons. I think one is because the ROI is much clearer in someone's face.
Yeah.
I sell you an AI tool that is going to boost your sales. Your sales come up, 20, 30% the next month. Clear ROI, right? This tool has paid for itself.
Yeah.
Same type of deal on the marketing side. Something's going to bring you out content on a new channel, and ROI is right there. So that is where I'm seeing the most buzz around AI. I think the much deeper conversation is around internal operations and back house work, if you will, that is going to evolve massively over the next couple of years, but it's a much more dynamic conversation when you're approaching that because every organization is different. And that ROI isn't super clear, at least in the short term.
Sure.
Right. So sales and marketing, I think the marketing side as well is really interesting because what we've seen is you have AI that can pump out content at an alarming rate.
Yeah.
And what you see a lot of people do is they just take this tool, give it a simple prompt, and push that out on LinkedIn or Twitter or anything like that. And what you notice is that people are able to pick up on it really easily.
Yeah,
right?
There's some signs, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think algorithms as well are starting to be able to pick up on that at the same time.
Yeah.
And they're not really pushing it out when it's very clearly AI generated and it's not really high quality.
Right.
So quality content still has a place, but where the really interesting thing happens is when you can use AI to create high quality content without, losing its essence, right? And we usually see that when you're working with AI, to kind of iterate on something as opposed to just writing it from scratch. And that's where you see the big productivity boost.
So you're talking about when you say the essence, you mean context and nuance, right? Which sometimes AI has a tendency to miss.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you haven't really trained it for your own voice and your own brand dialogue and the things that are important, right? I refer to that kind of as lazy AI. I think a lot of people use AI very lazy, like lazy automation. It's like do it I get getting rid of the rudimentary and the mundane kind of tasks with AI. I don't think that most of society understands the power of this thing yet. I think chatbots are become commonplace. They're built into almost everything now that we're getting. But there's a way to use AI and not be lazy, where you put a lot of thought into how you're going to structure kind of a workflow or whatever the case may be, right? So, like, what in terms of like, you mentioned ROI. Obviously people are I would say everybody, but a large portion of organizations who are trying to integrate AI don't really understand what you need to do that. It's not just a matter of subscribing to your $20 ChatGPT plan. There's a lot more to it. What are you like when you are consulting for Spark Engine and people are asking you about integrations and stuff? We kind of had a brief discussion downstairs about do you want it on-prem or off-prem in cloud? Like, are people asking you those kinds of intuitive questions around AI and what they need to implement it?
I think the implementation or the execution gap, as I like to call it, is a big factor. But the conversation we had was very heavily focused on the technical side, and usually before that conversation even happens, where I like to start is just being outcome driven and problem focused.
Awesome.
Right? So a business has intrinsic problems or maybe gaps they're trying to fill, right? Maybe you can hire someone to bring them on, right? Build a new team around it. But now we have this new tool, and that's what AI is, in essence, is a tool. It's not a magic wand. It's a tool that you can use, right? So first, we can say, okay, here's the problems we're trying to deal with, or maybe a company's trying to scale and, the numbers just aren't working out with what they're going to need to put in to scale, right? So we can say, okay, how can we start supplementing with AI and bringing in AI tooling that works dynamically with your existing teams and go from there? Right. And oftentimes I have a conversation with companies and they want to stick AI on everything. And I'm like, look, slow down. Let's see if this is even something we want to use AI for, because there's a lot of solved problems out there, especially with automation. I mean, Zapier notably brought in a lot of interesting automation tooling, 10 years ago, maybe even more now when they came out. And a long list of tools behind it that do something similar. And you don't always need to throw AI at the problem, right? Like, AI is very powerful, but you also introduce some variables to that can be hard to control with generative AI. It can be inconsistent at times. You need to have robust error handling for anything even semi-autonomous, unless you want it going completely off the rails and now you're risking core operations. So it can be really difficult to kind of get that execution working properly. And what we're seeing now, I think in the last quarter, 2 quarters maybe, is we've gone past the fever of AI everywhere, where CEO in boardroom says, we need AI now, figure it out. Right. And a lot of companies did that. And you see your chatbots and everything on company websites, but we're seeing not necessarily a pullback, but companies now saying, okay, what do we get out of all this? Right. Our shareholders are happy. We got a little bump because we said in a press release that we're introducing AI, but what now? Right. How has this actually affected the business?
Sure.
Right. And that's where companies are now, where before jumping into something, they're saying, okay, where does this make sense and why are we doing this? Which I think is good.
Which I think is a very healthy approach. And it ties back to what you said, which we're also driven by outcomes. So let's take a pause instead of going fast and furious towards something that we're not certain will be ROI or will require AI. Like, let's look at what is the outcome we're looking to achieve, and does this thing make sense in that journey, right? Because it is just a tool. Right. And the other thing that I think is really important to note, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is the security aspect of it. Because time and time again, when I'm sitting in front of a customer or a prospect or whomever I'm talking to, and they're talking about their usages of AI, and then they shed light on the fact that they've uploaded their entire financials, the last 3 years of financials, so AI can analyze it. And I'm like, well, where did you do that? And it'd be like on Cloud or ChatGPT or whatever. And I'm like, what? Like, you just made this public domain, right? So how do you mitigate or educate people? Because I don't think they're realizing that this isn't just some thing that you just put up somewhere. It's once it's out there, it's out there. Your information is now public domain.
Yep.
Right. So how do you educate them on the security aspects and what should be on AI versus what should be maybe on your own LLMs in-house?
Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting conversation, and it also ties into a conversation I often have with people around data in general because of my marketing background and with cookies and everything.
Yeah.
I think people who have never worked with, large data sets, especially on the sales side, have this weird fear around companies collecting their data, which I think is fair. But I think the intention that people think that these companies have with their data is misplaced, right?
Sure.
At the end of the day, Facebook collects your data so that advertisers can give you more targeted ads, right?
Give you a better experience.
Exactly, right? And there could be a long debate. I'm sure we could have an hour conversation on whether that's fully ethical or not. But at the end of the day, there's no individual that's there to steal your specific data, right? You are a persona, you are a group of people in that sense. And AI works in a similar way where at least if you're using, let's say, the free tier of ChatGPT, the data that comes in is used as training data, right? To make the models better and to have more data that they can use to train on. What you'll often see if you're using ChatGPT is that you'll get the two responses and you can pick which one do you prefer.
Yeah.
Right. That is directly training and reinforcing the model on which direction it should be going with its with its responses.
Yeah.
Now on the data security side with AI, I think it's still a very new space that people are figuring out, right? So let's say you're just going to ChatGPT on like a free or non, business tier and giving it your data. Yes, they are training on your data, but again, it's not like there's a single person that's going to be reading through your chats or anything like that. However, we have seen some instances where someone will repeat something to an AI or prompt an AI with it, and because it shows up in the training data, then that might show up in a response later for someone else, across the world who's asking that kind of question. So that's definitely a fear. I would definitely be very cautious around the free and, entry type tiers around AI. If you're using any type of data that for any reason you don't want everyone in the world to have access to. I think that's a line that can be drawn.
Yeah. And to some extent, like what you said earlier about, Facebook putting your information as part of a larger persona. It's not an issue until it is an issue.
Yep.
And it's an issue for you, right? So I think just how you settle that at the end where you're like, just be conscientious. At the very least, be conscientious of what you're putting out into the world. Because yes, nobody at Facebook is saying they're going, I'm going to go after this one person.
Yep.
But that data does exist. It's somewhere, right? So it's not an issue until it kind of is an issue, right?
Yep.
So I read this amazing quote from Andrew Ng, who was the co-founder of Google Brain and Corsica. And he said, AI is the new electricity. And that was such an interesting quote because in essence, he's saying just like electricity revolutionized planet Earth, AI is revolutionizing marketing and business. How do you see, what sectors are you seeing the most disruption in when it comes to AI? Because everyone's hearing about, efficiencies, and what that I think is code word for is staff reduction, right? And there's this big fear that this thing is going to be that disruptive. And you can read all kinds of stuff about that. But where are you seeing the most benefit or biggest impact in terms of disruptants or industries?
Sure. I think the industries itself that are being disrupted can be difficult to pinpoint because companies that are taking the proper initiatives and that are implementing the right strategies are most likely going to see benefit. I mean, there's more physical type, like blue collar type businesses, if you will, that at the end of the day are still going to have to hammer nails into a 2x4, sure. Right? So those you could say are arguably safer, ignoring robotics, but that's a whole other conversation. But I think it's where we're seeing an interesting impact is in larger companies, and I have an interesting position on this because I think we're seeing now the result of macroeconomics. 2020 interest rates went to zero. There's a lot of free money out there for companies to scoop up and hire big headcounts. I see a graph floating around a lot with engineers like computer scientists and whatnot, and it spiked hugely in between 2020 and 2022, and then dropped off and it hasn't recovered since. And a lot of people are saying, hey, if you write code, you're fucked because AI is here to take your job.
Right.
And I think it's a bit of both. So I think companies are implementing AI tooling that's bringing in these efficiencies, but at the same time, I think there was a lot of inefficiency just inherently in how these teams are built and how these organizations grew and bloated into something completely massive.
Right.
And AI is more of the excuse, if you will, to start cutting down on these teams without seeing, without worrying about cutting the wrong person and seeing a huge productivity drop, because they kind of have these tools as a backstop. AI is a great tool and companies are just starting to get a handle on it, but I don't think it's quite there yet in the execution and implementation to justify like seeing these companies cut, 15, 30% headcounts. AI is not quite there yet. And definitely their execution of AI tooling is not quite there yet. So it's a threat. I'll say where I'm seeing it the most is that, I say this to companies myself, is that before you hire your next person, let's have a conversation about how we can maximize the productivity of your existing tooling, right? We're not going to them and saying, hey, we're going to cut, half your team.
Yeah.
But we're saying, okay, let's maximize their productivity first and then see what we can do. Because a lot of it, it's like, you have 80% of the busy work and then 20% of what you actually hired them for, right? And we want them spending all that time on that 20%.
Yeah, I say it all the time here. I think the fixation on the deep work is really where we should focus our energy, right? The stuff that really requires you to stop, think, plan, map things out versus the mundane, rudimentary stuff that's like a machine can do that. And it really, what it comes down to is that stuff is really a waste of your time.
Yeah.
Focus
absolutely.
on the stuff that's going to move the needle or change the trajectory of your career direction and whatnot, right? Which is where I see a massive benefit. Because I've adopted it and I've leveraged it to help me get rid of a lot of that mundane stuff that I don't like working on. And now a machine's doing it for me and it's doing it quite well because I've trained it quite well.
Yep.
And now I can really help with the agency as a whole focus on the much more important stuff.
Yep.
Because everyone's talking about AI and it's the hottest topic right now, what are people not talking about enough when it comes to the world of AI?
Well, that's a good question. I think what people aren't talking about, there's a lot of different things. I think the data security one is an important one, and we kind of already touched on that. But I think companies are quite aware of that. It's more just how we get past that. I think it's almost what people are talking about too much, and that's the intrinsic abilities of AI. Because we see a lot of people saying, AGI is months away, and we're on this trajectory. And I think we're in a really weird situation where AI is both overhyped and underutilized.
Interesting.
Right. And what we see is a huge lag in the technological leaps, which are huge on their own. But the slack behind it is the implementation and execution in these companies.
Sure.
That is going to take ages, right? And especially with larger companies, it's like, these big shifts in their tech usage take time to implement, right? Yeah. And looking at like enterprise sales cycles, for example, you enter something like that as a SaaS type company, you're looking at 9 to 12 months before that deal's closed, right? Just to get the deal closed.
Yeah, when you say overhyped and underutilized, I see it as like I see it too, and I 100% agree with you. Is AI's everyone's reacting right now. Yep. There's this huge reactiveness going on in society where it's like we must be doing this thing without understanding what this thing can actually do for you. Because there's a lot more than a chatbot that it can do for you, right? Yep. So that reactiveness, I think, is just from everybody literally sitting there saying, we have to do something with AI. And anybody who's willing to offer any sort of input on that is like, let's do that because somebody said that that's the thing to do, right? And I've seen it here. Like our team uses it in a lot of variety of different ways, but everyone's kind of using it slightly differently. There's something new that's being brought to the market. Literally every day there's a new example. Hey, check this out. Have you seen this? Hey, look at the tools we're using. Gemini came out on our G Suite, and it's like, okay, well, what can Gemini do versus OpenAI versus Claude versus all these other tools that are, and I think there's a lot of confusion when everyone's just like reacting to use something.
Yep.
Right? So, when you're talking to prospects and your own clients and advising on AI, what process should they follow? Like, what should people who are like, okay, I listened to Andrew. Andrew said, take a step back, think about my outcomes. Love that, because I think that's where everyone should start.
Yep.
But then it's like, what questions do I ask a guy like Andrew about, okay, here's the outcome I'm looking for. What do I do, man? Like, tell me about that. Like, what should people be asking experts about AI when they're interested in expanding their business or ROI or whatever, sales, marketing, whatever the case may be?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing, let's take this from an organization perspective, right? First. So what is really important to do right off the bat is mapping out what your organization looks like from a workflow perspective.
Okay.
So not like an org chart that you traditionally see with roles and titles, right? Is that, what are the tasks that people are doing on a daily basis? Where is that going, right? Who needs to be responsible in these different tasks? And you get this kind of workflow map where you're able to see, okay, here's where a lot of labor intensive things are happening, right? In this specific department, and it's all getting tossed on this person. And there's a huge bottleneck, right? That if we manage to clear this, there'd be a huge efficiency gain, right? So if you're able to get a map like that and you're able to visually see, okay, here's all the tasks, this is the bottlenecks. Now you can say, okay, let's look at this area more specifically and see if there's any AI tooling that we can, implement or build or integrate to, alleviate this bottleneck. That's the best way to move forward once you've, have a good idea of your organization. But I still think that's, very problem focused. So beyond that, what you should be looking at is, the different, there's so many different tools out there that you can use. I think, all of them have a different purpose. So Gemini, for example, their core value proposition is that this is embedded in your G Suite, right? You have these tools available directly in Docs, directly in Sheets, right? In your email, and it all works together. And I'm sure Google has a kind of long tail strategy here where this AI is going to get continually better and be able to assist you with more things because it's going to learn about your organization, and that's going to grow very, very naturally, right? And that makes sense because what I often see is, like you said, it's a new tool, it's a new tool. Well, how does it actually fit into your workflow?
Sure.
Right? With Google, it makes a lot of sense if you're, making a proposal on a Word doc and exporting it as a PDF and sending it out as an email, right? Super easy workflow, right? But now if you have to log into this other tool that you're using and then this other tool to polish it up, and it's not a very cohesive workflow, and that efficiency is almost
diminished.
Lost. Yeah, because you're jumping around from place to place.
Right.
So it's not just about, where can it be used, it's how does it make sense to be used in your workflow. And I think it's really important too, because what you need to think about, especially as a larger organization, is I can throw this tool at my team. It doesn't mean they're going to use it.
Absolutely. I think there's a with some, and we've seen it in other organizations too, there's a bit of a resistance because it's intimidating.
Yeah.
Like some people don't want their information out there. They don't want to prompt this thing wrong because now it's like, the fear of asking the wrong questions. It exists in, one-to-one conversations. It certainly exists with machines too.
Yep.
Right. Interesting point though that you bring up, which, I'm a numbers guy. Like I love quantifying things. And when you talk about, organizations that are identifying their inefficiencies, are they are you seeing them identifying those inefficiencies from gut? Or have they quantified it to say, hey, we have, this much headcount, this many hours per week. These are, tasks that are repetitive, and we know that they take this much time, and we feel that AI can help solve the time it takes to do this thing by 90%. Are you getting conversations like that? Or is it more like, hey, I think this is where we're inefficient,
It really depends on one, the organization's size, and also where we're starting.
Okay.
Right. So if I'm dealing with a larger organization and my conversation starts with a department head instead of the COO, I get a much more, on the ground view of what's going on. Right. I trust the department head's gut a lot more than I trust the COO.
Sure.
Because there's 5 department heads that the COO is managing, but that department head is managing that team directly, right? And have a great on the ground view. And even better if I can have a conversation with, one of their foot soldiers, right? And say, hey, what's the actual day-to-day looking like? Where's this bottleneck? So with smaller organizations where, you have someone or a couple of people who have a great view on what's going on a day-to-day, you can trust their gut a bit more. And I'll lean into that because they'll know like, hey, when we're trying to send a proposal out, it's always this guy I'm coming back to. It's always this team that I'm like, when's this coming through? When's this coming through? And maybe by no fault of their own, right? They could be completely swamped. It's not necessarily they're doing a bad job, but it's like, that's when I know, okay, they have a clear view on what's going on here. But when you look at larger organizations and definitely, more of a top-down view where departments are siloed and they don't really see what's going on in the day-to-day, that's when we'll usually suggest like, hey, we need to audit everything first before we make any decisions because, the report that you got, like the quarterly report that you get from this department may say, hey, this is our output and everything like that. And you may say, hey, that's a sore thumb. Let's deal with that first. Well, without looking into that further, that may not be an AI problem or something that needs to be solved with AI at all, right? And then we're back to just solving problems that don't make sense to solve with AI. So it depends on the size of the organization for sure and who I'm speaking to, but that's usually the approach.
That's awesome. I love that you keep referencing like there are certain things that you just don't need AI to solve. Like AI is not going to solve every one of your problems, and sometimes it could actually be overkill.
Yes.
Right? So I don't think a lot of people understand it. I think a lot of people are seeing this future state of robots doing everything for us and these machines learning everything that we do. And it's like, no, take a pause, get grounded and understand where things are going before you start jumping into this either investment or whatever. What do you wish that more business leaders understood before trying the AI everything?
I think one of the biggest things would be understanding the time that it's going to take to get everything working properly. So when we see, someone try to implement a new AI tool in an organization, there's two different reasons why it can kind of take some time to have legs. One is the actual adoption among their workforce. And the other one too is that we can do prototyping and we can kind of build the system, early on, but the prompting and also some fine tuning sometimes of the models, it's going to take time to kind of get that working properly and to make sure it's working in a way that makes sense for the organization. And to say that you can just do that right off the bat, and it's funny, it goes back to, with marketing is, I think a lot of people work with marketing agencies or engage with one and they expect things to work overnight, right? I've done, SEO for some companies in the past, and I have to tell them, manage expectations very early on. It's like, look, this is a 6 to 9 month plan that we're on here, right? And that's when we're going to start seeing results. So I think a lot of AI companies, because of the pace that things are moving at and their competitive landscape, go to these companies and say, hey, this is going to fix things immediately, right? Start using it and your world is going to change overnight, right? And I would caution you with anyone coming to you saying that they have a magic wand called AI, because if they are, it's either a very, very specific tool that's very dialed in which case, fantastic. But most of the times I would say, be wary and look before you jump.
Yeah. The reference that I use all the time is we're marketers, not magicians.
Yep.
So like, don't come asking me for an overnight success story because that's not the way marketing works. And I'm glad to hear that you kind of use that same principle when it comes to AI because there are so many platforms and so many things you could do. And if you're not really outcomes driven, again, going back to that, I think it becomes just this big void or this journey you're going to go on with no end destination in sight. And you're going to be wasting a lot of time and money and effort to build something that isn't necessarily going to get you anywhere, right? I really love the idea of talking to the feet on the street in organizations because they are truly the ones who understand their pain points and what things should be resolved. I mean, as leaders in organizations, we can see things from a very 30,000 foot level and be like, I think that needs fixing or this is the direction. But, when the leadership team is setting the mission and the vision, it's the people that are on the ground floor doing the work, right? So they're going to know the gaps of where there's room for improvement. So I love that is a great nugget of insight that I think the audience should take away because if I'm the one saying, here's where I feel there's gaps, the reality of it is it's probably not the right gap, right? So I do love that. Awesome. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming here on the show. I'd love for you to kind of tell the audience how they can get a hold of you, like what you're doing, what's new and exciting in Spark Engine, what sorts of organizations are you looking to work with?
Yeah, for sure. So I think what we do at a fundamental level is accelerate AI adoption within organizations. Medium to larger organizations is usually where we sit. I think what we ultimately bring to the table is that AI is moving at such a pace that it can be difficult to keep up and do your regular job.
For sure.
Right? Well, my regular job is to keep up with everything, right? Consume content, try out new tools, make sure that the best is top of mind for me. So, at the end of the day, as a, C-level anyone, it's not your job to stay up to date with everything. It's your job to run the organization, make sure everything's working on a day-to-day, and we can come in and help fill those gaps. So that's ultimately my value proposition to any of you out there.
Awesome. And I would say definitely take advantage of Andrew and what his organization is doing. We've just scratched the surface today with AI. I mean, we can get really deep into the specifics of where this thing is going, well, where we think it's going, and it's going to continuously evolve. But I just want to say thank you for coming on here and sharing your wealth of knowledge in this space. I think it's a very interesting topic and a very interesting time to be alive with all of these things going on. So appreciate you coming on here, man, and sharing your wealth of knowledge. If we will share Andrew's contact details in the post. So check below if you get a chance. And yeah, by all means, start asking the right types of questions when it comes to AI and really focus on those outcomes, because that will drive certain decisions on whether or not you should or shouldn't be pursuing AI for a certain thing you're trying to accomplish. So lots more to discover, lots more to talk about, but thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for everyone for checking this out. See ya. Thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of it, please like, subscribe, or share it with your friends.